Information is a word that's kicked about quite a bit. So we're going to try to talk about it tonight. And before I get into that kind of thing, what does information mean to some of you? We'll talk about new definitions and things of that sort. Anybody want to volunteer what they feel is a fairly adequate description of the word information? Any ideas? Say it any way you want to. Let's make sure we're talking about something.
That which leads to a solution or something. I don't know. You've got to give it the circle.
Do whatever you want to do with it.
That which leads you to solve something. I don't know.
Like a blueprint would be information, the kind.
Yeah.
For those that can read it.
What about an entity that's susceptible to linguistic and mathematical manipulation? Sometimes
that's a fairly adequate definition. Any others? See what range you can cover. Okay, when we term insufficient information, I'm going to try to show you the problems we have with language. If you are a medic and somebody brings up a particular procedure in surgery, you might say that's excellent information. And if you're a medical student, you might say that's not enough information. And if you're not in the field of medicine at all, there's practically no information. So people assign the word information to something that's informative to their background. And so when you use the word information strictly as a word, it has very little meaning. So you can hand someone a paper and say, read this or look at this and let me know what you extract from what you've read. And whatever they extract from what they read has to do with their background reacting in terms of the articles. Anyone has a problem with that? Is that too complicated? Shall I say it another way? Any questions about that? All right, so no one can provide information to anyone. You can lay out a whole series of things, say 200 bits, and a person may extract 5 and twist them around. And so they will say, you gave me that information. It may not be so, because information is a poor word. Well, the only thing to do is to hand someone something or show them a movie and say, what do you draw from that movie? Say it's a movie on the future, and you walk out and say, I thought the clothes was just fascinating. You don't mind it. And someone else may go in the movie and says, didn't you just love the drapes? In other words, we don't know what a person's going to pull, because their background determines that. So here we talk a little bit about different kinds of information. On this preliminary drawing here, you try to tell me what it is, in this case.
Toilet bowl?
Here. Is it a musical instrument?
Ghost.
A skull.
Skull. It's a ghost. Was it a skull?
Yeah. You see it now? And anybody doesn't see it?
Yeah, I thought it was a ghost. Well, ghost in the place.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah, ghost.
All right, wasn't it?
Yeah. That's what they look like in movies.
Is that what they look like in movies?
Well, you know, they always give you that. That bit.
Eerie look.
I gotta see that movie. All right. Now, when was that information? This is dealing with that word. When was it information?
When you turn that little light
And
on.
it made a gestalt in my head.
Right. When somebody said skull, it was information to that person. To other people, it could have been any number of things depending on the association their background assigns to elements of the object. Do you think you understand that? Elements of the object, a portion of the object may look like a toilet bowl. That portion. I can see that too.
Yeah, that does look like.
See? So I can see that as an element of possible information. But there's a little more than a toilet bowl in it. There was other bits that were not connected with the toilet bowl. See? All right, so information is a bad word. If you look it up in a dictionary, it says something about having information. To be informed as to inform. which is so fucking terrible, because no one knows what information means, and information doesn't mean anything unless there is a change or linkage with associative memory. All right. So if you're worried about communication, you have a reason to be, because the language that you speak with is poorly engineered and makes it difficult for all of us to share ideas and experiences. This is why you have so much difficulty with your girlfriends or your boyfriends or your mother or your grandmother or politicians or your relatives. It's because the language is highly inadequate. All right. Now what you did with that toilet bowl thing, people do with personality aspects. They get mad at you for something you didn't do because they recognize some elements of a personality that terminates in riot right here. But some people may have personality that moves like this that doesn't terminate in riots. Is that, how come you're headed for a riot? Because we pick up elements of that portion of the term of the personality and associate it with other elements of that. Okay, now there's an interesting experiment in information. I think John might, you might want to do this. Go ahead and make this model, since you seem to be interested in making this kind of thing. I don't know if you are. You tell me if you are. I pointed this out before. If you took a piece of cardboard and made a tiny peephole in it, in fact, cut a hole in cardboard about a half-inch diameter and put another sheet of cardboard behind it. There's a reason for that, with another hole in it at about the same position. That forces you to look in a straight line. You can't see anything unless you line up the two holes. You can do the same thing by looking through a tube. Is that all right? Mm-hmm. I put the two sheets of paper here to show you that on center, if you drill your hole down here, you'd have to look down. All right. A guy named Eames. He was called a furniture designer, but he's really not. He's more than that. And does anybody know of Eames' work?
Charles?
Yes. He took some wire, like coat hanger material, and he put a piece of wire in a position in the foreground, and then behind that he put a piece of wire shaped like this. And then he put a piece of wire behind that. And then he put a piece of wire in space behind that. And then he put some little pieces of wire in space behind that. When you look through the peephole, this is what you saw. See, in other words, these legs were in the foreground. All these elements were scrambled. Well, only looking through that hole you got a view of the chair. I mentioned to some of you that at one time, I think, if you were able to do this, take a bunch of books and objects and stack them so that it produces, because you have to be somewhat of a, you have to have a picture, a reference. Well, let's assume we go back to this silhouette of Lincoln. If you stack books and little pieces of Scotch tape and other things together on a chair or on a table and put a light behind it until you get this arrangement. You can even use some Brillo. Just stack it on the table here and use the light far enough away. Whereas why, that's a silhouette of Abraham Lincoln. Then when they look behind the table, all I see is Brillo and books and they're in different planes. If you use a parallel beam of light, see, it'll do this. If you had to arrange the elements, and so what you're working on the elements to produce a shadow you want. And you can produce a shadow of anything. And sometimes, in the natural sequence of events, we see a shadow and we are amazed or frightened. And sometimes a shadow is produced. In the early days, they used to have a thing called a coat hanger, in which a person put their hat on the top, and there were coats and all kinds of things on it. And sometimes the street light, would cast that onto the wall of another room, and people would be terrified. And it's very hard to check out all events. These little bits are partial bits of what they call information. And it's very hard for us to say, it looks like the shadow of a person, I wonder if it is. All right, it is possible then, perhaps, to be able to decode something like this as a pictorial simplification of what? Yeah, a pictorial simplification of the pyramids. We can almost get away with this. We might get away with this. And it is possible that, like I tried to indicate in the past, when somebody drew a male, they drew the male like this. They drew the legs, and they drew this extension coming down. And the female, they just drew this area. That was the major difference. And male, woman. In very early development of language, they used to do pictorials. And so today we've gotten so far away from that, with the small a and the capital A and the King's English and the curlicues, thick and thin lettering, you know, that type of shit. And they had all kinds of crap. Wouldn't leave it alone. And they kept it. And then, of course, you think I'm kidding. They actually, some people went to work piddling with the inside of that shit, too. Do you know that? On marriage certificates, way back in the early days, like $1 bill. You got more shit on there than you can flush in any toilet bowl. And when it comes to gingerbread patterns, money, marriage certificates, contract certificates, would you call it surplus information? What would you call it? What would you call decoration? Clutter. All right?
Aesthetic information.
What?
Aesthetic insignificant information.
Insignificant information.
We're supposed to make it more impressive, though.
Noise.
It's supposed to impress the
And
recipient.
how can it be impressive?
Just by its excess. They figure if they've got time to be this excessive, it must be something.
Why don't they send you a certificate of debt with excess on it?
They probably do. I don't know.
If you owe $10,000, why don't they send you a beautiful gold inlay type thing saying you owe $10,000? It just says pay or you'll be picked up at 4 o'clock. Very plain. See, it's only in a warranty or guarantee that you have a silver ribbon hanging on your shirt. All kinds of, yeah, you don't laugh at that stuff yet, but someday people will. At diplomas and all that kind of shit, which they hand. It's a piece of paper printed to look like it has great significance.
But it's a picture also. You often hang those things up, and it has to look nice in your house.
Visual
The diploma.
noise.
It's visual.
Visual noise.
Visual. No, it's probably derivative from another time when people
Yeah,
have
right.
papyrus.
Is it necessary?
Oh, no.
Right, see. So you get into information. Now we'll talk about simulation of information. At certain times, people try to impress other people. And they used to get a whole batch of United Cigar Store coupons. That doesn't mean anything to most of you, does it?
No.
United Cigar Store coupons. And the United States Navy used to go to China many years ago with a lot of United Cigar Store coupons. And they go in the Chinese stores and they buy lamps and things, and he'd stash it away. And he said, it didn't take the Chinese too long, maybe 6 months. And in the meantime, they came away with a lot of goods. So what they did is simulated information. It's called deception. All right? There are other people who took United Cigar Store coupons in great numbers and put a $100 bill on the top of the United Cigar Store coupons and a couple of rubber bands around it. They went into a store and he peeled off the $100 bills and said, "Can you change this?" Right. And that caused people to be impressed by them. Now, the technique that was used, has to do with information. A guy would come into a church and be very well dressed. He'd rent a Rolls Royce for an hour or 2 hours. This guy would pick him up. He'd get out, he'd come into the church, and he'd take out that near that and peel off $100 while everybody was giving $2 or $3 or $4. And $100. Then he'd walk out and say, "Who is he? What does he do?" Then he would come in back to the church during a social on a land promotion scheme. And thousands of people would want to buy into this wonderful, God-fearing, good-giving man. Okay? And so what he did is simulate the greedy fucking values of the people that attend the church. He simulated their values. So they got sucked in. Okay? But if they were churchmen, they'd say, "Oh no, I don't want to make that much profit on my fellow man." Anyway, it didn't work that way. So he had people to continuously simulate information. Can you name other examples of information simulation?
Newspapers.
All right.
Commercial.
What?
Well,
Commercial.
public relations in general. I mean, if you
Rubber tits.
rubber tits.
Rubber ass,
Well, don't take that away if you...
artificial
It's a real
hair,
thing now, huh?
artificial hair,
Rubber doll, life size,
Whatever.
female, male.
yeah, all right. Now, what is information? How can you deal with that kind of word? So, if you sit down and try to figure out an approach to our life's problems, you're going to have to do what Fuller does to some extent. Whenever he runs into a linguistic jam, he invents his own language. And he says, all right, here's a new word. This is what it means. And from here on out, it's much easier than, so what do you mean by information? You can get stuck wrestling with people because they have different associations as genuinely as yours. When you start talking about new ideas, they look at the dictionary and they'll argue, because here's exactly what it means. See? And so it's better to invent a new word and then you don't go through all that shit. And you say, where the hell did that word come from? Don't say it came from you. Say it came from a professor of language at Oxford. Then you repeat it. But if you say it came from you, who are you? You rippity sneak? A new word? Not worth a shit. All right, so if you invent words, go on and invent a more appropriate word. No one has the right to say this is the only word that you use. Now we think, when we write books, we always look in a dictionary or a thesaurus to find an appropriate word. Make your own words, because you'll find, you get up in your school and say, it's not adequate. She said, what do you mean it's not adequate? Everybody's been using it for thousands of years. They've been beheading people for thousands of years. They've been burning people for thousands of years. It doesn't make it right. It doesn't make it useful. Therefore, I suggest that you, when you use a new word, in the beginning of your book or the end of your book, you have an explanation of the new words. You ever see things like that? Fuller uses it, and technical journals use it when they write for the layman. They have a built-in dictionary at the back of the word, glossary of terms. All right? Now, a lot of you people here are afraid to do that. Or you're afraid that you don't have command of the English language. Command of the English language is nothing but trouble. If you had good command of the English language, it means you're stubbornly non-utilitarian. Good command of the English language forces you to a discipline that's inadequate. Therefore, you've got to change the language. And we suffer sometimes, we sit back and try to solve a problem. A lot of us, at least most of us here, think in terms of words. We sit back and we think, well, can I use you? Paulette? We think in terms of my grandmother. She's that fucking grandmother, bothers my ass. We think in terms of words. And the words that we think about are the old words. So that's why it's hard for us to work out a problem. Now, you don't have any problem. No one has any psychological problems when you show a movie and it shows the floor getting hotter while a person's lying on it. It shows the temperature going up and the audience yells, get up and get off. Get up and get off. Notice how appropriate everyone is? Well, the Indians is, but they're very appropriate. And you see a tremendous alligator coming out of a swamp, and there's a little baby playing, and the mother is sewing something looking the other direction. The audience says, turn your head, you fool. See? They're very appropriate. Look, save your child. When the alligator comes out of the water. So people have kind of appropriateness. Language has put in so much elaboration, sometimes in between the act of behavior, that can you think of the elaboration of language, whereas a certain particular aspect of behavior is desirable? Think of elaboration, even in technology or medicine, that isn't necessary. Yeah. Suppose I walked into your house and you said, how do you do? I said, how do you do what? How do you do? How do you do? Think about the words. What the hell? How do you do? He's going a way. A way. What about B way? What does a way mean? I haven't heard from you in a long time. Do you hear from a person that writes a letter? Hear means what? If you ever sat down and analyzed it, you'll find not only is it bad, it's not worth a shit. It's totally contradictory. Some foreigners picking up a book, sometimes he made his horse fast. They say, it's a racehorse. But they really tied it to something. And so the language is really fantastic. And so again, if you find problems with language, sometimes your thought processes, examining ideas, you don't even know this. Your brain is so misorganized that in thinking out ideas, you run into a jam because what you think with is the same kind of tyranny-type language that stifles your ability to move forward. Now, it's very hard, very difficult for us to set aside our background. This is almost impossible. Take your background and set it aside. But if you try to force people to something else, let me show you what happens. Let's try to conceive of a new device for the home. Now the device is as new as you can possibly make it. Think of the device and then describe it. And let's see what happens. A new device in the home. Like the phonograph would be a new device prior to the phonograph. That would be a new device. Now see how difficult it is for us to think of a new device. Have you ever invented your own language, an esoteric language? When you know somebody for many years, you both assign a word to some event. And the word is your own, something that you use, but it doesn't mean what it ordinarily means. Because you develop an esoteric language. And only the people in a group or in a particular religion understand that language. We develop esoteric behavior. Like, if I light a cigarette and we're at a party, it means let's go, it's boring. So instead of saying, hey, let's go, it's boring. So when I light a cigarette, just, your Uncle Harry comes in at 4 o'clock. I said, Jesus, that's right. So people develop their own language and their own devices so they can blow, instead of saying, let's get out of this trap, which is a very, very insulting kind of thing. And if the dinner that people serve isn't adequate or you don't care for it, instead of shoving it aside saying, I don't care for it at all, people are hurt by that. All right, in the future, they won't be hurt. They would recognize the very fact that you don't particularly care for that. In fact, they probably won't even invite you to dinner. They tell you what they're serving. Then you'd say, how have the tastes been modified? And they give you taste D44. Now, that doesn't mean anything to you. But I mentioned to some of you in the early days that the primary colors, what is it, red, yellow, blue, there's really no black. Whenever you take black and analyze and blow it up under a microscope, it's almost in the violet range, purple. But there's no black. The printing industry had been looking for black for years. Carbon black isn't black. It's blue when you reduce it, look at it under a microscope. So they take certain primary colors, and by mixing them, they can get any color. Now, I think I mentioned to you in terms of information, if you took a wheel consisting of the primary colors and spin it real fast, it becomes white. How many of you have ever seen this? There's no color visible. If you spin a wheel with the primary colors, it becomes white. Now, if they talked of color that way, they said white contains all the colors. But, like I mentioned in an earlier session, if you take a disc of glass and airbrush on it lines like this, or print lines on it, and put a source of light behind it, and the lines are black or dark purple, then spin it. At a certain speed, it'll look red. Another speed, it'll look purple. There's no color in it at all. That's why color is an effect upon the retina, which is interpreted by the cones as color. But there's no color. None of us see blue as anyone else sees blue. Or you see yellow differently than I see yellow. Even though all of us here may not be colorblind, we still do not see colors in the same way, nor do we hear sounds in the same way. So when we look at a sunset, you may see brilliant colors that I'm not even aware of. There may be shades and gradations and halftones that I don't even see. And so I say to you, my, it's a beautiful sunset, and yes, it is. But he doesn't know that I'm not seeing what he sees. When you studied music most of your life, and you listen to some heavy classical music, you can hear in that music things I can never hear. And not only that, but you can hear how well coordinated the instruments are, which most of us don't hear. So when you say, wasn't that a magnificent performance? Oh, when I go to ballet, what the hell do I look for? I just see these girls dancing, and it looks very nice to me. And Vega says, they're like a truck horse. And I thought it was beautiful, because I don't know what to look for. All right, so now what do you look for? Suppose you get involved in the arts, and you know what to look for. How would you say? How would you begin to... How do you know when a person's watching an artist perform, whether they're performing like a truck horse or whether there's antagonism? How would you know that? Now, this is the problem. To attempt to decipher a method of communication that has no prejudice in it. This is the problem. So, if I look at a painting and I say, I don't like its work at all, I don't think most of you that know me would let me get away with that They said, what do you mean by you don't like his work at all? Well, I said, well, it's poorly executed, such as. See, you have to do that. Now, in the arts, we don't pick up that degree of precision in language. So, whenever you deal with man, you deal with the background, the variations in problem, variations in interpretation. So, you're bound to have problems with man. Man cannot, under any circumstances, be appropriate. And that goes for me, too. I just want to make sure you understand that. And so I'm going to go on to try to prove something to you today. Try to prove it. I'm going to try to prove that man is inappropriate. So we go back in the early times. In earlier times, people used to trade. And value was an arbitrary term. If water were valuable, a man would give you 3 bales of hay for 1 quart of water. And if he lived further on the desert, and he could manage to collect gold, he would give you 15 pounds of gold for a gallon jug of water. So people traded. But when there was lots of water, then the trade went off again. So here you have variations in the system. You go one part of the world, salt has great value. Another part, it has little value. A kind word has no value in a humanistic society. It only has value in a tyranny. So when you say, my, the people are kind in this society, you say, well, should they be otherwise? I couldn't understand it being any other way. How come the person wouldn't be? All right, here's where we run into the problem then. In times past, there was an artist, Norman Rockwell. Does that ring a bell for anyone? He did a cover of a magazine once in which he tried to depict an early occurrence in America. A person would take a grocer or a butcher would take a chicken out of the case, and he'd say it's 5 pounds. Yeah. And he'd give it to the person who's going to buy it. They say, 5 pounds? Somehow, the muscles become tense in a person feeling a chicken that's about to pay for it. Become a little tenser. And a person who wants to make money on chickens has a kind of a relaxed on. The chicken seems to weigh his arm down. Psychologically, it just seems that the chicken weighs more. And the person buying it, if they have less money, they become more tense. 5 pounds, more like 2.5. So people used to argue for years. And a guy came along, and he said, just a minute, you good citizens. They try to bring an impartial guy in. And if the impartial guy is a weightlifter, and he picked up the chicken, he says, it seems to weigh 3 pounds. And if a young lady came in that was anemic, she said, it weighs 7 pounds. So it was very hard for man to make agreements in any area at all along those lines, the barter and trade system. So they finally developed a scale. I want you to know how it came into being. They made a gadget with a needle on it, and it said 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And they hung the chicken on the bottom of a hook, and it moved over to a given point. Now the butcher didn't like that, because he noticed after he bought the scale, he didn't make as much as he did before he had the scale. So he put a small sash weight in the chicken. He cut the chicken open, put a sash weight. You know what that is? Like a hunk of lead. He put it inside the chicken, and he put it on the scale and grinned. And then the woman says, okay, I'll take it. When he took the chicken off, he took the sash weight and put it back in the drawer. Now, Norman Rockwell had a drawing of a woman reading the meter of the scale, and the guy with his finger on top of the chicken, and the woman with her finger under the scale. Now, there's a message in that. The message is that instruments can be tampered with, weed out instruments. And the whole idea then, every human being doesn't want to take a decision from another person because it will and definitely always must have elements of prejudice in it. I want you to get out of the idea that you can ever sit and counsel with humans. This always includes me, just in case you didn't know that. So we need a system of instrumentation for social design. A system of instrumentation that will give a decision that has no investment. The simple scale, the bathroom scale that people buy, do I look like I've lost weight? Well, yes, you do. No, you don't. You get on the scale. The engineers in the early days used to argue. They used to figure things out mathematically as to what this plane can stand in wing loading. And so they used to do this. They had a bunch of immigrants working at the airplane factory, and they used to load the airplanes, the wings, with sand, bags of sand. Because the engineers said it'll hold 50 bags of sand. and they'd pile 50 bags of sand on it. And then they'd keep piling them up until the wing broke off, clunk, and then they knew that it was designed to hold a given load. Even though the figures said thus and so, they used the sandbags. Of course, the airplane was all loused up with sand. And years later, they turned the airplane upside down, something like that. And they put a fluid bag here, and they kept running fluid into it, so the weight would be distributed evenly over the whole wing. Then they designed another system, in which, this is a little more difficult to follow, they had a bunch of gadgets connected to the wing that looked like little seesaws, and this would pull, there'd be a hook on here, then there'd be another little seesaw here with hooks on the wing, and then a double seesaw here connected to those hooks, and it would pull and exert an even force all along here, because there were thousands of little, something like a mobile. You know what a mobile is? So when you pull on this, if you pulled with 100 pounds, there'd be 25 pounds on each strut, automatically and evenly. So doing this did away with the sandbags, and they had a pull scale load here, so they knew exactly what the loading was, and they had to carry sandbags around. Man needs instruments. He has to know. All right, so in the tire industry, there were questions as to whether to herringbone the tread of tires or whether to zigzag it for better traction. And so men used to argue about theories of traction, whether zigzag or nodules or projections or cups. The old vacuum cup, you remember that? So they put even vacuum cups on automobile tires in the early days, scooped in so it'll hold the road and not slip on a rainy day. And the vacuum cup was great, but the air got compressed in there, and it caused the tire to slide almost like a ground effects machine. It didn't work. Then they began to try to figure out how they can determine what the best undersurface is of a tire. And they began to press them down on glass. And they photographed dyes of different colors, how it was squeezed out, what percentage of it was squeezed out, and how dry it was where the tire made contact with the glass. They began to make instruments. And then, after the instruments were made, they would take the car out and run it down a wet pavement, and they'd have always the same car with different tires on it. And then they'd jam the brakes on at a given point and measure the skid, and develop the correlation between instrument readout and the length of the skid. And that is, again, why we must eventually terminate in a totally instrumented society. That's why nurses, I remember in the early days that the old Turks used to put their lips to your forehead for fever. I don't know how many of you remember that. Maybe it's used in other countries. Did your mother ever do that? Put her lips to your forehead? Well, and sometimes they stick their finger up your ass. He's got a fever. Now, the point is, he's smiling. I tell you what the Turks did, a lot of people didn't believe it. My relatives would piss in the glass, and they'd give me the piss when I was sick. Doesn't it taste like piss? And my brother was that's ridiculous. But this is what they used to do. How many of you ever been exposed to that kind of shit? That's right. This is not uncommon amongst Turks.
They use it sometimes for tapeworms.
Use what?
Ooh.
You drink urine and that makes you regurgitate, throw up, and it's supposed to bring the worm
It
out.
makes you throw up, I guess.
Salted fish. Anyway, we get back to the communication problem. Is there anyone here that has difficulty with that? That there's no way linguistically and emotionally and people with hang-ups, different vested interests, and a different set can possibly sit down and evaluate a situation. Whereas instrumentation is not perfect, but it's by far a closer approximation of the events we're trying for. Now, when someone comes up and says this, what's your answer? Yes, but wouldn't that dehumanize man? What is your answer? How do you answer that kind of question? If you understand what I mean by instrumentation. Is there anyone that has any difficulty there? Must you provide an instrument for all things? Or what do you want? You want an accurate report? Would it dehumanize man? What do you think? What do you mean by humanize? Permit variations of opinion? In critical areas? If a surgeon put his hand on a blade and says, I think it's sharp, the other surgeon put it on and says, I don't think it's too sharp. No. No. There are instruments that indicate that. What is sharpness? All right, I try to indicate something to some people at one time here. I try to tell you how a knife cuts bread, which I always ask in a physics class. How does a knife cut bread? that's just as sharp, why do you have to move it up and back? Why don't you just press it down and cut the bread? Why does it move up and back? Because the blade is just so sharp. It's as sharp as it's going to be. You can take a razor blade or 9 razor blades and put them on your finger and put a heavy weight on it. It won't cut into your finger. Just move it slightly and it cuts into your finger. How is that? They say when you move it, it reduces the friction. That's words. It doesn't tell you how it cuts the bread. I'm going to try to give you a description of how a moving knife cuts bread. Some of you may have difficulty with this description. This is a cutaway view of a knife. And I didn't put a fancy section in like this, John. I didn't scoop it out. Hollow grind, the blades. All right? Now the angle of incline when you press against a loaf of bread is like 16 degrees, angle of incline. You know what I mean by that? This angle is about 16 degrees, each one. When you move, this is a long shot of the loaf, of the knife, and this is the handle. See? I'll shape it. Okay? This is the sharp end, and this is the handle. When you want to cut an object right here, when you move the blade from this point to that point while you're going through the object, the incline becomes longer. I don't know if you follow that. Okay, see this hollow ground area? When you press directly down on a loaf of bread, the incline is 15 degrees. But when you move it, it's a long, slow incline, sharper. When you go from here all the way to a long, sharp edge, do you see that? You, Rich?
I don't know. No.
All right. If you put a dot at the leading edge of the blade and run it up at this angle, it's a longer and sharper leading edge. When you run a knife into the wind this way, it's sharper than it is this way. Do you see that? You have difficulty with that? If you ran...
incline?
You're saying the knife is not really horizontal, totally.
It wedges its way.
It wedges in
Yeah.
an angle, you know.
And you get a longer, slower point. Do you see that?
Like a
If you
point.
cut a knife this way with a machine and looked at it, it'd have a long, sharp end rather than an abrupt, sharp end. Is there anyone has difficulty with that?
Yeah, I don't see it.
All right. If you cut this knife in half that way,
Yeah.
it will look like this.
Yes.
If you cut it at an angle that way with a machine and looked at the sharp end, it would look like this. If you cut right across here, you get a longer, sharp. You see that?
Yeah.
So you're cutting, you have a steeper, you have a sharper incline. In other words, if you travel through water with a knife this way, just lean it in the water, you go so fast, so much resistance. But if you put an angle to it, the water goes slower. In other words, it's a slower rise to the thickness of the knife going this way. A boat, in other words, with a hull at an angle like that, will be faster than a boat that has a straight front, even though it's scooped. Do you know what I mean? If you think about it that way. If you give people the mechanisms, angle of incline, if you give them specificity in description, you stand a better chance. The trouble with most courses in physics is they give you the law. They don't always give you the principles involved, because some of the principles are not understood. And men have invented words for describing what seems to happen. That is visually what seems to happen, but not descriptively what seems to happen. Another mistake that you'll get into in physics is sound waves and the propagation of sound waves. They show you an emitter of sound, and then they show you the waves coming out like that. You remember that? Mm-hmm. But if your ear is over here, the information is not coming like that. It may not come like that. It may hit the ceiling and come directly at your ear too, but softer in the same way. And I'm sure sound doesn't travel like that, like they draw it in the school books, or even in the physics books. It moves like that, it moves like that, and it moves like that, and it reverberates back like that at the same time. You think you understand that? Otherwise, if I had a sound emitter here, it can't be coming out beautifully, because all you'll be getting is an end view of the sound. You think you know what I mean? All right. In a movie theater, then, if this is the screen and this is the audience, and this is a movie projector, they always show the movie coming out like that. Then they show you it being reflected to this viewer right here, see? When it's reflected to this viewer here, the whole movie, and to this viewer up here. And this guy sees Tom Mix over there. And you see Ruta Valentino over here. And Elvis Presley up on the balcony. So it's reflected all over the place. You can move up and down. But they always show in our school books as though this was so. As though there were, like I indicated before, if this were a lens, they show you, your school books at least run this way. This is what you'll be getting if you get into physics. They show you an arrow, and they show you a lens, and they show you the arrow going through the lens, inverting itself, and the point being here, inverted like that. I'm sure you recall that. But if you put the screen here, the arrow would terminate here. But the arrow, if you look through the lens here, is also going through the lens here too. You can see the arrow. And you can see it up here. And if your eye were this size, you would see the arrow over here. And if your eye were back here, you'd see the arrow over here. So that arrow must be going down this way, that way, the light in the arrow, that way, every which way. So you don't draw it diagrammatically, is that the way it went? Because that interferes with your ability to think about things in the world outside. Because they show you a person, and they show you the light reflected off the person going through the lens and winding up on the photographic plate upside down. But also, if you move your camera down here, what happened to the person that was going over here? It must be going there too. If you drop your camera down here, you'll still get the person. So you just say light goes in. Don't forget, if you were to suddenly put the camera here, the person would be going down to your camera like that, wouldn't it? Well, does the person go down to your camera like that? Or does it go like this? It's just that the camera intercepts light moving in that direction. So if you tell people that your image, Callie, doesn't move from you to my eyes, it's moving all over the place. If I move over here, there's light reflected off you. If I move down here, it's reflected. So the image of a person is reflected all over the place. It just happens the camera is at the point of intersection of the light reflected from that point. Does that make sense here? But the diagrammatic descriptions are not correct. Right, now what does all this mean? Here's what it means in a practical sense, daily applied sense. That suppose I was shooting a picture, and I was shooting a picture of a couple sitting in the chair there, and I'm shooting that picture, then I want to take it from over there. All I need is a mirror there to give an angle, and go out of focus and then come in on that mirror, and then I'll get a ground line shot of you. Then suppose he opened the book at the time and he was showing the book to Carl, say he held it up. I put a mirror on the ceiling and move up to the ceiling, and that shows the book being opened, and it shows Carl looking at it. Why do you have to put the camera here and there in the other place? Maybe you can intercept the light at different places. See what I'm getting at? That's what comes of this kind of thinking. It'll save you a lot of time, a lot of energy, and a lot of money in photography or any other area. Because instead of waiting, like if I had to wait for 7 o'clock for good shots, or 6 o'clock where the sun is about here, depends on the time of the year, so that all buildings cast shadows, strong, long shadows. So I used to wait in the early days to 6 o'clock. Now I turn the set in relation to the sun. In other words, if I want to photograph 6 o'clock and the sun's overhead, I mount the set at an angle. Is that clear? And I get the 6 o'clock long shadow. So is there anybody that doesn't understand that? Do you? You don't? Do you, John?
Yes.
Rich? All right, in order to get, what you try to do is simulate the arrangement. So if you make a table where your set can be rocked and rolled, you can keep the lights in one place and get any kind of lighting you want, or move the lights. What you need then is a hemisphere for the lights that can travel through that, or else the set traveling. All right. We're talking about visual perception. We're talking about sensation. We're talking about, in the early days, there was a guy named Harold Lloyd. I don't know if that means anything to anybody. But he'd always be working out off on an I-beam on a skyscraper. He'd get a job painting the I-beam. And it'd be photographed like that. And you'd look down and you'd see traffic going by down here. It would thrill everybody. Well, what they did is they built an I-beam sticking out of the wall and a movie screen flat. And they projected from the back in the early days up at the movie screen or traffic and all. And here was this guy sitting out on the I-beam looking down at traffic. He couldn't get hurt. Now, another time they'd go up on the roof of a 20-story building and they put an I-beam out here. See? And the guy'd be sitting on it, but the camera would be at that angle. And you'd see, clouds and little cars down here. They'd shoot it at an angle. So there are many things you can do with mirrors, too. So Only fools use a real situation where it's not necessary to endanger a life. So we don't think in those terms yet because we're not conditioned to, nor are we habitually like that. Our associative systems don't work like that. So in order to break from common associative systems, you have to play games. Now the games like chess don't do that for you. So you play with a pointed vision, called. You look down and low and above and just play with those things. Do you see what I mean? Until the brain has points of reference regarding a position of the camera. Does that make sense to you? All right. So instead of playing chess, play with your camera. Don't take photographs. Just look through the view box, rock it, tilt it, play around with it, and build an associative chain. Then go shoot. And then before you shoot, make an assumption of what you think you're going to get. And then look at what you got to see if your assumptions are correct. All right? Now, when a person says, arrange the lighting so that you can bring out the essential features of the object. Now, what the hell does that mean? But if you do this to people, if you take a corrugated surface and use a light directly above, it floods that corrugated surface and doesn't look as corrugated. If you put the light at an angle, it throws shadows and valleys in there, and the texture becomes definite. If you want to photograph a wrinkled hand, you light it with skim light, and all the blood vessels show up. If a person has a lot of lines in their face, you take a frontal and illuminate it well and fill in the lines. Let's assume I want to photograph that person and make him look like 17. Okay? I can put a grid in front of the camera that adds light where there's dark. Do you think you know it? Or with lights, I can design lights that hit the dark regions, the jowl regions. You know what I mean? The dark rings under the eyes, I boost a little light under that. If your nose is small, I can make it look large by shading it, you know, with light or lack of light. Now, you can be able to do some interesting things with light alone to make a round object look square. I'm really talking about perception communication. This is a round tube, Cole. A round tube photographs something like this. Where it's light, it's dark on the inside. And where it's dark, it's light. That's how a round tube photographs. But if I arrange lights with shadows, so I throw a lot of shadows on that tube so it looks like this. It'll look like it's either indented or corrugated tubing if I can arrange the lighting. If you don't know what that means, in front of the projector, I put a piece of plastic with a tint in it, and then it's very clear there in front of the projector. So that throws a line on the tube. So this area is black, whereas this would be very shiny here. I got a dimming effect on the filter. So it's equally white all along, and this end's round. That's going to confuse a hell of a lot of people. You see what I'm getting at? A tube would be gradual, but by using filters, I can make it look square. Where a man has a nose sticking out, I can make it look like it's sticking in. Where the nose projects forward, make it look like a hole by shading, counter shading. I'm trying to say then that information, which taking it all the way, which I did in another session, tried to make the point clear. I said that this particular thing that I draw occasionally is nothing but a black, say a black square. And this is the letter 1 added to it. And this may be an L now, reversed, see? And this may be a black square here, which is no information. And this, now I'm going to thicken the bottom line. Then I'm going to add just a black line here, and skip a space and add a smaller black line there. And then just add a black line there, go up like an angular L. And with these little bits, since it's really not a human being, it is interpreted as such. It is interpreted as such by putting in these little bits like this. It is not a person, but it is inferred to be, because there's enough information to close on that. It would be possible then, as I said before, trying to drive this information home, that a TV program consists of cameras on people. But if a TV program had the camera information fed to it from a computer, and all the screen did was spray black and white on the screen, sprayed it, you can create people. You can create characters, old characters, young characters, babies, gaga. You create black and white. I'm not talking about a film. Just spraying black and white from a computer of a man walking. And then you dial the age, 73. Arthritis, 17 years. And you go on. Hemorrhoids, or whatever the hell you want. And the guy walks as though he had a pain in the ass, and if he has cancer of the larynx, he speaks a certain way. You can simulate vocal, pictorials, rotational, squares, cubes, without any square or cube. We always assume that you must have in the memory bank the object. All right, now see if you can follow this. The human being is not capable, due to the nature of the rig, of holding information. What happens when you project an object on a screen like this and erase it on a TV screen? Ping, ping. The human being can pick up subliminal cues and pick that up, but it goes off the retina very quickly once you erase it on the screen. In other words, if you throw information on, off, you will still pick up enough to know it was the letter J or an F. There's a certain rate you can do that with, and a certain rate that some people can't pick it up. All right. Now, if you flash this on a screen fast, and then in the next tenth of a second, flash this on the screen, and then off, and then flash this on the screen, and then off, and then this on the screen, the retina doesn't let go, and it'll hold all of that information on that screen, even though you're going boom, 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 boom. There's a lot of bits there, and that comes from the bit where you have 3 lamps. And this goes on, off, on. And it looks like it's moving across the plane. Do you ever see that? And we honestly believe that we've seen that ball move through all of this space. Although we know the lights have to be at a certain interval. Click, 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 click. It looks like it's smoothly moving across the plane, yet it has never moved through these areas. The brain fills in. All right. It might be possible to spray on a TV tube a mouth that is pleasant, whatever that means to you. My background. Then eyes that are pleasant, on and off, nose, nostrils, skin, hair, on and off, only one bit at a time. And the retina doesn't let go due to persistence of vision. It holds for a small portion of a second. And if you can dump in all that information very quickly, a person will see something on that screen that isn't there. But if you had super fast camera, then click at high speed, you will see only a portion of an eye. Maybe you'd see just this on the screen. And then if you photograph the next second, you'd see that. And this would disappear. Then if you photograph the next second, you would see other bits. I'm trying to say then, the language of the future may be comprised of selected essential bits. Here's what that means. When a person says, this is a solid picture of the letter T, that's a solid T. A solid H might look like this. I don't know if I'm right, but anyway, a solid H might look like that. So whenever you get a significant solid image, when we decipher that it's significant by survey, the future of TV will splatter information on the screen enough for you to say President Ford, and no more, because if that's what they want to decipher. So they'll tell you a story, like speech compression, you know, when they compress language, you have to learn to listen to those tapes. You ever hear them? Anybody ever listen to them yet? They tell you a story in 1/10 the time, and they try to bring it down, tighter and tighter, compressed information. Well, if you did an image system of Little Red Riding Hood walking down the road, Lisa Wolf, you see the grandmother in bed, fast, all this sort of thing. And you say, yeah, I got the information. And you get used to seeing movies that way.
The Clockwork Orange did a scene like that.
They did? What scene was that?
A love-making scene. He picks up 2 girls, brings them up to the bedroom, and to Beethoven's Ninth. He go, to the William Tell Overture.
Yeah.
You know, the Lone Ranger thing. Yeah, and he did where he made love to one and undressed one and got up. Something like that, super fast like that. And then one girl got dressed and then he undressed her and jumped back.
Right. Now, I wonder how much information a person could pick up on the history of science if we get conditioned to that. I want to reflect upon something I talked about at sessions in the past. I said that we speak at a certain rate due to the vocal and respiratory system. Since it's abrupt, since we have to take a breath and then speak, we have sentence structure. But we don't have that in thinking. We can think about things very fast. We can cover that in thought. And when we read, we have to slow up because the physical equipment can't move as fast as we can think. So we In other words, when you're speaking to somebody, very few people are surprised at this phenomena. You would imagine if you had to talk to somebody, you'd have to look for a word and say, I will do. But you don't find yourself doing that. You speak and you talk about things and you're never looking for anything because you're riding a chain in the brain automatically. That's just think before you speak. If you did that, you wouldn't be able to speak. If you had to think of every word, I always tell people, don't think because you'll louse it up. Because what happens is, whenever you tell a story, you're not thinking about anything. Otherwise, it would take a year to get the information out. So, thinking, meaning reflecting upon each thing, would show if you did that. If you thought before you speak, you go like that. I will, and you select each word and arrange it and deliver it. We don't. And anything that's done what they call creative work are associations in the brain that are done this way. Tick, 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 stop, useful. The brain scans and gets a useful idea from bits that are enough for you. Now, there are some people that have an elaboration of bits. They have so fucking many bits that they think with that are not necessary. Can anybody give an example of that? But in order to think out a daily routine, they have created a set of bits in their head that is far superfluous to the task. See if you can think of an example.
You mean selecting the wardrobe you're going to put on, bits like that?
Yeah.
What perfume you're going to wear? Should I use this color or that color?
And when you consider all of those bits, if a bird had to do that and never get off the ground.
Yeah, that's good.
Because this bird is running, so I'm doing 20 miles an hour, I got to flap the wings now, but don't walk the goddamn thing. You're beating the right wing too fast. So the bird works on biofeedback. That is, it gets feedback of air pressure under the wings. It feels the weight of its legs when it's running, and if it still feels this is heavy, it beats its wings harder. Then it feels less weight on its leg. When it feels no weight on its legs, it retracts the legs. See what I mean? So it works on that kind of feedback principle. Man works also on feedback. Education and language has become a jam. The thinking process of man is extremely fast, and the writing process of man is extremely slow. When you write, you are doing some tremendous damage to the brain, and this is the damage that's occurring. Whenever you write a sentence out like this, you can think the sentence. Euripides Sneed met Paul. See, however you, like that. But to write it, you got to slow up, coordinate the muscles and the finger movements and all that sort of thing. So you develop a habit of neuronal association which has a very complex linkage. And that's why writing and thinking are not related. I don't know if you see what I mean there. Will anybody try to elaborate why in the brain writing and thinking cannot be related? And if you start writing early in life, it slows up your thinking process. Because you think linguistically, words, comma, question mark, period, hyphenated, all that sort of shit, which interferes. Is there anybody has trouble with that? Therefore, the future is going to have to try to find some kind of symbolic system for delivering information and a shorthand technique for writing, different than the shorthand that's used today. Any questions? Any comments? All right, I'd like you to toss some of those ideas around and think about them, because that has a lot to do with your future. If you try to toss ideas around this way and think about the things I talked about tonight. Shall we go for coffee?